Welcome to another session at the Ec Desk, where we're going to discuss another 3 books today. But first, I want to do a mental check-in with everybody. Like, how are you doing out there? Because I don't know about you, but on my side of things, I'm getting a little bit stir crazy. I mean, there's only so many books I can read before I'm like, should I do my 5th workout of today? Because I do not know what else to do. Am I right? Books can't hug you back, but you know what? They do take you to another world, a fantasy realm, one of a sci-fi creation, anything your heart desires, and gives you that feeling of escapism during this time of uncertainty. So for today, let's start talking about the 3 books that I've got up on the desk for you. The first book up on the Ec Desk today is none other than The Shining by Stephen King. It's a horror book, or a psychological horror novel, if you will. You see, originally published in 1977, you would have thought that by now I would have read this book a really long time ago, but no, and here's my reason why. So they made a movie over this book, right? It's called The Shining. I mean, it's by the exact same name. And many of you have probably watched this movie because it's considered, well, a classic. I consider it classically terrible. Terrible. Even Stephen King himself, who wrote this book, hated his movie interpretation. I didn't start reading this book until way later in life because I was like, the movie wasn't that good. So does that mean the book will also be terrible? No. In this case, no. The book is better. You have this haunted hotel story is what it is at its base. And if you haven't done your history or your research, the hotel that is mentioned in this piece of literature, they call it the Overlook. But the Overlook is actually supposed to represent a real hotel that exists in our society today. It exists in Estes Park, and it's a haunted hotel that goes by the name of the Stanley Hotel. I don't know if you've heard about it, but you might want to do some research. It's very, very interesting. But the parallels are almost eerie. Well, Jack Torrance, he gets this opportunity to work at this hotel kind of as a caretaker, I guess you could say, of it. And he's able to uplift his family and take them there so they can live there over the winter months. And he can get paid for taking care of this hotel during that time while also working on his next novel. Now, the Torrance family doesn't just involve Jack, right? It involves his wife, Wendy, and his son, Danny. And Danny's actually one of the first individuals in this piece of literature. He's 5, but he's extremely gifted, who realizes that something's not quite right with this hotel. Now, what I loved about this piece of literature that I did not get from the movie was how extremely personified the hotel is. The hotel is alive. You see, it's not that the hotel is possessed. It's more like the hotel is the thing that's doing the possessing. What is this place? Why does it feel like it's a monster? Why does it feel like it's alive? What the movie was lacking that you get from the book is Jack Torrance's struggle with almost like a possession, if you will, of whatever the entity is that presides over the hotel is doing to him. You get his inner thoughts, you get the manipulation, and you are there with him also being manipulated to the point where you just can't put the book down. Honestly, there was nothing about this piece of literature that I didn't like. It's a pretty thick book, as you can see. All Stephen King books are. They're very long, and it does have some smaller font, but the descriptive elements, they don't lag. They keep you engaged, and around every corner you don't know what's about to happen next, which will constantly keep you on your toes like a good psychological horror genre book will. If you think you could just go watch the movie and not read the book, you're wrong in this case. You cannot fill one with the other because they are entirely different storylines. I don't even know why they call it The Shining. It doesn't even feel like it's based in this gloriousness that is this piece of literature. Overall, I would go ahead and give this piece of literature a 5 out of 5 star rating, and the movie a 1 out of 5 star rating. I don't even know why I would give it a 1 star, but I think I'm just gonna. But the book, definitely 5 out of 5, a must read. I've read lots of other Stephen King books as well, and trust me, if you are someone who loves psychological thrillers, horror, or things that just make you think, I think he's the author for you. Your second book up on the Eck Desk today is a book by the author Leigh Bardugo called 6 of Crows. Now, this book is very, very recent, published in 2015, so only 5 years old. And it is a young adult piece of literature, fantasy fiction. And talk about the world building. Now, you know me, I am all about world building. And if you can create a world I've never been a part of before, you have me hooked from the start, because I'm going to follow your universe until the moment that it ends. If you can create a universe, you're a genius. Bardugo's universe revolves around something known as Grisha, I believe is how you pronounce it. At least that's how I'm going to pronounce it. If you're looking for something to compare them to, I would say very much like warlocks, if you will, or maybe even druids. For those of you who are big D&D fans, those are Grisha. Like, they can heal. They can be experts in warcraft. And the setting is very much like an Amsterdam-inspired type city known as Ketterdam. Ketterdam is kind of slum-like, if you will. The people who live there, they steal, they barter, they cheat for a living. We're living in this atmosphere because of the people who are the oppressors, the people who have the power, the people who have the money, who can keep everybody subdued, especially the Grisha. See, there's this kind of poison, if you will, that's trickling throughout the society that is very, very deadly to people who carry the Grisha gene. And so Grisha are forced to find themselves in places of hiding. To me, it very much resembles what even happened in our own world at the time of like World War II, when we had an oppressor, when we had Hitler, who did not favor a certain type of individuals. And all the chaos that ensued because of that hatred of just one type of individual, because of what they believed in and who they were, that is very much channeled in here. So there's very much some historical relevance to this piece of fantasy fiction. I think my love of this piece of literature, as well as its sequel, stems from my love of Dungeons and Dragons, because there are so many unique characters in here. It very much feels like the character rundown from Dungeons and Dragons. It kind of feels like Leigh Bardugo was channeling that here. She was kind of like, let me pull up Pathfinder and decide what each of my characters' races and classes are going to be, and I'm going to put together a party, and we're going to go on a little adventure, because that's pretty much what they do. There's this whole party of really unique races and classes that come together, and they're going to break into something known as I believe it's called the Ice Kingdom, if I'm remembering correctly. Oh, the Ice Court. Kaz, in my opinion, if we're thinking about D&D, is very much channeling the fighter. So he is really, really good with like almost any sort of weapon, but really like close hand combat. Kaz is your man. Now, Inej, if we're thinking again about D&D, is our rogue in this party. She is super stealthy. She can hop from rooftop to rooftop. Anytime that she's wanting to do an acrobatics check, she gon' master it, right? We have Jesper, who is the bard of our party. He's the guy who's making the jokes, who's encouraging people, who's basically the life of the party, and is always going to make sure that regardless of the situation, everybody keeps their spirits up. Wylan is going to be our alchemist, because he's good with bombs. The man can fabricate bombs out of anything. Matthias, who's basically our bruiser, our barbarian, he's a tank, and he's going to knock over anything and everything in his path because he can. And Nina, who is actually our main character in this piece of literature, who has the Grisha gene. So she's going to be our healer and our druid character. This band of merry fellows and adventurers gangs up together to go to the Ice Court on this journey, to which I will not spoil the end, because the journey is the best heart, as well as their time in the ice court and the plan that Kaz is able to come up with. So if you're someone who is super into Dungeons and Dragons, or even into like Final Fantasy, the video game, I think that this book by Bardugo is definitely something you should get on the bandwagon with. I mean, they lured me in from the start. I was like, wait a minute, am I reading an epic tale of D&D? Sign me up. And there's a sequel? What? For this book, I'm going to give it a pretty high rating. Now, I'm not going to give it a 5 out of 5. I'm actually going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. Maybe even a 4 out of 5. Now, I know I've been fangirling hard over this book, but it does have its moments where the characters are a little too overdramatic. They kind of act like children when they're all supposed to be adults, and nobody can really get along when they've all decided they're going to be in this together. And they're also super gullible, and it makes sense with the storyline, but I think the way that Bardugo wrote it, I, as someone who was reading it, was not manipulated by the situation. If you're looking for an adventure, this is definitely a book bucket list book. The third and final book on the Eck desk today is one by my lady, Felicia Day. It's actually one of her memoirs called You're Never Weird on the Internet, Almost. Now, I don't have a physical copy of this book, so I'm going to go ahead and do another drop of the book title page. I downloaded this book initially on my Audible account so I could listen to it as an audiobook because it's read by Felicia Day. So yeah, duh. For those of you who have no idea who Felicia Day is, well, I'm a huge Supernatural fan. And Felicia Day is one of the main characters in that TV show in some of the later seasons. So the moment that I realized, because I follow her on Instagram, that she was going to publish this memoir, I knew I had to read it. And the fact that she would be able to read it to me, bonus nerd check. Now, this is a memoir, so it is a story about just like a moment or a section of Felicia Day's life. And what it kind of revolves around is like the early half of her childhood and how that kind of shaped who she became in her later part of her 20s going into her 30s when she was really finding her way in life and her path towards stardom. She had a very interesting upbringing, and it was weird and it was awkward and it was quirky, and it is not like many of ours. And I think that's what makes her story so interesting. But I really related to her story because I am weird. And I feel like weirdness is an adjective to describe somebody that is an exceptionally flattering one because it means you're unique. And I feel like in our society, uniqueness should be so much more valued than it actually is. And in Felicia Day's book, you get that uniqueness that she is as a person. And I now value her so much more even than I did before. One of my favorite parts about Felicia Day's book is her detailing basically her comeuppance to stardom. Now, she is a huge World of Warcraft fan, and guys, she's good at it. But it got to the point in her life where she was addicted to this video game, and it pretty much controlled her entire life. And that's how we got the TV show The Guild. Yeah, that's right. She made her own TV show. The TV show details essentially her life. Like, she writes this show because of the life she led, about a group of individuals who are all friends, who've all connected because of this video game that they're a part of, and they've created a guild. They've created a family, people who can support each other, and they're all weird. They're all unique individuals who can prosper together in their own way, and isn't that just what makes life great? In addition to her nerdiness and her wackiness, Felicia Day does detail her struggles, and I appreciate in this book, and I think this is overall, other than the nerddom, what makes me love this piece of literature that she's created, this memoir she's written, is her ability to remain raw. She is not going to sugarcoat anything for you. She's laying it all out there, being completely honest, and allowing you to make your own interpretations. Was it at times cringy? Absolutely. But did it make sense at the same time why she included those cringy elements and why she wanted you to engage with them? Yes, because they were a part of her life just as much as those non-cringeworthy moments and those moments that are supposed to make good literature. Now, I loved this book. I honestly would give this book a 5 out of 5 stars based on listening to Felicia Day tell her own story. I think if you're listening to this on something like Audible, it's going to be a 5 out of 5 star book for you because you get her tone and you get her voice and you get the purpose behind the piece of literature for her. However, if I would have purchased her book and if I were to have sat down and actually read her book physically for myself, I would not give it 5 out of 5 stars. I'd probably give it 3 out of 5 stars. And that might be a little generous. The book was kind of scrambly and all over the place, which is how life is, right? Life doesn't follow a certain trajectory. But sometimes in a piece of literature, that loses me when things are scatterbrained all over the place and I can't follow a certain plot structure. I just want to set the book down and I never want to pick it back up again. Her book was very repetitive. She kept coming back to the same points over and over and over again. If you're someone who loves Felicia Day, if you're someone who loves supernatural, if you're someone who loves memoirs, this is a book you're going to want to listen to the author read herself. I do greatly appreciate you tuning in once again for these pieces of literature. If any of these dinged your bells, you should definitely make sure that you have the opportunity to go ahead and go find them, whatever it is you decide to go ahead and use, using the free Libby library app, listening to it on Audible, or purchasing it for super, super cheap on something like Thrift Books. Go out there, live your lives through an adventure, because these books are an escape from these uncertainties. Give you some you time. And one of the best ways to do that is to pick up one of these books and just engage in everything that it has to offer.